to Transformation in Trials. Welcome to Transformation in Trials. This is a podcast exploring all things transformational in clinical trials. Nothing is off limits on the show, and we will have guests from the whole spectrum of the clinical trials community. And we're your hosts, Ivana and Sam.
Good evening, Adam. I'm really pleased that you can join us for what will be our second episode of the Transformation in Trials podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Sam and Ivana. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm thoroughly looking forward to the conversation, wherever that might take us. And it's a great opportunity to get to know you better and hopefully to share some of my experiences as well. So thanks again for the opportunity.
No, it's brilliant. We were super pumped to get you on the show, actually, because you're pretty prolific on social media. I know you're involved in podcasting yourself. You've got a lot of great insights and experience in the space too. So with that in mind, maybe to get us started, could you walk us through a bit about your background in the space and maybe tell our listeners a couple of facts that they wouldn't be able to find out for themselves on LinkedIn if they were to look at your profile?
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I've been working in clinical research for the last 25 years since I left university. I studied pharmaceutical sciences at Greenwich University in London in the UK. And that has taken me through CRO and pharma over that period of time. I've worked in the UK, overseas, extensively managed global teams. And my primary area of interest, I would say, is biometrics, data, everything and anything to do with clinical trial data. And that has taken, across all phases. So from early phase where I've set up biometrics units all the way through to late phase and rare disease space. So it's been very interesting, extremely varied. And over my career, I have had the opportunity to meet with all sorts of different individuals, cultures, and that overlay has really given me broad experience across the clinical space. For those who might not otherwise know, I have an awful lot of active interests, one of which is Brighton and Hove Albion. I'm a season ticket holder and I go to all of their home games. I love that. I also love rugby and I'm a follower and supporter of Harlequins. And my son and I often go to Twickenham and watch the rugby. Last weekend, we were there watching England play Wales in a not too shabby game, which was quite exciting. And the first time there'd been 82,000 people there back. So yeah, we get about. I like lots of sport, lots of outdoors activities, and I have two dogs who keep me very active. And that's where I do my best listening to podcasts, actually, when I'm walking my dogs morning and evening.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. I think we share quite a few common interests, particularly on the personal side of things, actually, with rugby and dog walking and podcasting to boot. So yeah, exactly. Great to get that insight. Now, what we try and do with Transformation in Trials is we keep it fairly broad, but we like to have a overarching topic to theme each episode. And for this week, we thought we would get into the whole topic of real world data, real world evidence. And I think seems to be a really hot topic. That and decentralized trials. You can't go on LinkedIn without seeing somebody talking about decentralized trials or real world data. Sometimes that's me, actually. So it's probably one of the hottest topics in the space, but we have a pretty broad audience here. So maybe give us the elevator pitch about real world data or real world evidence. What is it? What problem is it solving? What are considerations and challenges?
So, from my perspective, having worked in clinical research and clinical trials for 20 odd years, data has not changed, but the manner in which data has has changed. And where I'm talking about is in the early days, we were talking about pen and paper, clinical trial methodologies, and patient information being collected in that form, to the advent of technologies, cloud platforms, and fully integrated CTMS systems, clinical trial management systems, which integrate electronic data capture, ePros, patient recorded outcomes, and all those devices to today. So what we've seen over that 20 odd years is really the adaptation of technology overlaying the detail and the information that we always collected in clinical trials. So where we are today, clinical trials cost a fortune, and it costs many millions of dollars to get a drug to market. So pharma companies, by very definition, are looking for the quickest way to get drugs into patients and participants of clinical trials. And the experience that we've had in the last couple of years with COVID has proven that what we thought to be the status quo, namely that it would take 8 to 10 years to get medications into people's arms, is no longer the case. And the bar has been set extremely high, in that within less than a year, vaccines were going into people's arms on the back of COVID-19 and the pandemic that we've experienced in the last couple of years since March 19. So I don't know whether in a roundabout way that answers your question, but there are all manner of different tools that we now have at our disposal in the palm of our hand. I'm referring to phone technologies that now exist that we take for granted, that previously would have been, the memory capacity would have been in the size of a house, probably, now in the palm of our hand. So, the capabilities that we all take now every day for granted, the sharing of information and the integrity of that data is also now just a given.
Got it. Okay, no, that's an interesting summary. And I think from my standpoint, are you actually starting to see now data collected from a patient's mobile phone, not just an ePro or something like that, but actual real world data that is outside of the confines, I guess, of a clinical trial, a traditional protocol? Are we starting to see that infiltrate into the mainstream, if there's such a thing?
Absolutely. I mean, it's already happening, and many listeners will be familiar with wearables and the fact that, on their wrists and indeed within their mobile phones, they are now collecting tracking data. So whether that be GPS or movement or steps or, simple things such as oxygen saturation. Some phones, some wearable watches are even collecting that information now. So real world data is being collected whether we like it or not. And we're all signed up to that by virtue of the fact that we've got these incredible devices in our pockets. So big pharma are tapping into the big technology companies and the mobile phone providers because that data is already out there and it's already being collected and exists. So in answer to your question, it is being done right now, and there are overlays around regulations with regards to that. But also, I think we'll see over the next coming few years more and more of that on the back of many changes to regulations that we've seen over the last couple of years, specifically with regards to the 21st Century Cures Act with the FDA in 2018. That was really a game changer, alongside the technological advances that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years.
Got it. No, that's pretty clear. And I think when you introduced the topic, you kind of touched upon benefits to the sponsor. And clearly from a sponsor standpoint, it's in the sponsor interest from a financial perspective to get a drug to market as quickly as possible. But we know that there are other very important stakeholders involved in the clinical trial process. So what about the impact of real world data on some of those other functions, be that the patient themselves, obviously the most important stakeholder, but also the site and maybe other cross functions within the pharma organization and landscape too? Curious to get your perspectives there.
Yeah, so I mean, patients, as you say, are absolutely pivotal. Without patients, you don't have clinical trials, and without patients, there is no reason to do what we're doing. Ultimately, this is about improving the lives of people living with long-term conditions, whatever they might be, in whatever capacity and across many different disease areas and therapeutic areas. So the data, as we say, is already being collected through electronic health records, through medical claims data, through disease and drug registries. And that's the real world data that's being collected today that we know about. And alongside that, as you referred to, patient recorded outcome devices and patient diaries have always been a thing, but they just weren't very good. And the data collected from them was very poor. So people would invariably turn up to their doctors or GPs surgery and just be filling them out literally outside the door and then handing them in and saying, there, this is what I did for the last month. Now, with mobile phone technology, you can have all the reminders and all the pings and all the technology that's in place to ensure that whatever is collected, there is a full visibility and an audit trail around that, and we can prove that now. That's where technology has really translated that patient recorded outcome from a patient diary paper into a real world situation today, where we get quality data and quantitative data that we can actually analyze more broadly.
No, it's fascinating hearing you talk about that, and I think something that came to mind as you were kind of articulating yourself there, particularly when you're talking about the wearable devices and organizations and tech companies there that are involved in that, is really around the blurring of the boundaries, if you like, of pharma versus tech versus pharma, big tech getting into pharma and vice versa. What's your kind of reflections on that, having been in the space for a while and worked in this in areas that involve lots of data and are very tech heavy?
Well, as I said, my passion has always been data. It's always been trying to get the best outcomes for patients, whether they be my own family, who are all being affected by medications and life-changing experiences, as much as for the general person in the street. And I think, to your point, big tech have seen this one coming for a while. They're smart. They're smart people. You only have to think about how many cycles in advance Apple prepare for their iterations and updates. So, for example, I know we're coming into a new phase of a new phone, for example, at this point of the year, but actually there's only a half upgrade based upon the September, October that's coming later on in the year. They plan 12, 18 months, 24 months in advance. And most tech companies, if they're entirely honest, would be planning 3 to 5 years in advance. So they've always been looking far ahead of the curve. And what we have now is we have opportunity for pharma and tech to work together and identify where the value is in that information. And just one thing I wanted to pick up on my previous point was with regards to how that impacts on patients and the real world data piece. In my experience of working in and around rare diseases, that is the most pivotal change that we've seen, in that there is access to medicines off-label and off-license that there is a visibility of that wasn't there before, through patient advocacy groups, whether it be online groups, Facebook groups, parents, through pediatric requirements. So the accessibility of information is so much easier to get hold of, but also you can join groups of like-minded individuals who are experiencing the same symptoms, or in their children, in their parents, in their grandparents. So there is a much wider opportunity to use the platforms that we take for granted now, namely, this window that we're talking through, this wonderful window of Zoom, but also, more importantly, how that translates into effectively bringing access to those medicines to where they're needed and when they're needed.
Yeah, no, really fascinating problems and reflections there. And I think it kind of leads to my next point in question. It's like, where do you start here? Because the world's your oyster, right? There's so much data out there. You can collect data from any modality possible. Literally, there are no boundaries, but there has to be. And surely there has to be a starting point in terms of defining the questions you want to ask. Or shouldn't we look at it like that? Should we keep it open-ended and collect data for future purposes that we might not know about today? And I'm sure there's no perfect answer to this particular question, but from someone that's worked with data all their life and in and around it, I'm curious to get your perspectives on this. How do you get your arms around this topic?
Well, you never do. That's the bottom line. You just don't, because it's everywhere and there's so much of it. And what I've experienced in the last couple of years is an absolute explosion of that data, and the number of companies and associated services that recognize the value of that data. It is effectively the new oil, because patient data is the thing that will drive uptake of medicines, but also lifestyle choices and the awareness that we have of what we put in our bodies and the outcomes of that are so much more broadly understood now by the general population. The sorts of things that we take for granted now as being everyday speak in and around clinical trial language, who would have known what a pandemic was, or I don't know, a coronavirus or a protein spike, for goodness sake. That was something that I learned about in immunology lessons in my degree. It certainly wasn't something that I thought would be on the front page of a newspaper, a picture of a protein spike, for example, that was going to take over the world. So, the world has significantly changed, and data has been pivotal to that, to the point where, it wasn't that long ago that every day in the UK, we had government ministers standing up telling us coronavirus data on a daily basis, whether it be death rates, vaccination rates, uptake of drugs. All of these things are literally like the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. And I turn on the TV at 5 o'clock and I can see the chief medical officer of the UK standing up there giving this information out to the entire population who are glued to that screen. That has never happened before. So we are working in a whole different world of perspective. And I think, to your original question where you started off was, where do you start with that data? You can start wherever you like. And Big Pharma are looking at what they perceive to be the greatest return for that value of the input. If you were asking me, where would I start? I'd go personal. The things that have impacted me most personally over my lifetime have involved my own health and that of my family and friends. So those would be the things that I would focus my attention on. But nevertheless, therapeutics are so broad now, and there are so many overlaps across those different therapeutic areas. And I think that other key point around that is really lifestyle choices that we have so much more awareness of now than we ever did before. Namely, what you put in and the impact that has on a daily basis. Corona was really that eureka moment when people were talking about underlying symptoms. Whoever knew about underlying symptoms unless you were working in clinical trials? What are your underlying symptoms? So no one died if they didn't have underlying symptoms. So suddenly people are thinking, oh, crikey, I've got asthma. Do I need to be worried? Or I'm slightly obese, or my BMI is 30 and it should be 24. My blood pressure is 20% higher than it should be. Oh, I've got an underlying condition. Should I really be very careful? Should I be leaving the house right now? Should I be shielding? All of these questions are things that we've all had to ask ourselves over the last couple of years and have translated themselves into community adaptations.
Adam, that's a great segue to a question that I would like to ask you about the benefits of real-world data for the patients themselves. Because we've talked about technology companies, we talked about pharmaceutical companies, but what can it do for patients?
Ultimately, this is only going to give more choice to patients. It's going to give them more access to the information, more access to drugs that they perhaps didn't even know would be suitable for them. So the patient will gain from this ultimately. And assuming that healthcare systems in and across the globe can support the access to those medications and the regulatory pathways exist, then patients should ultimately be better off for it. It wasn't that long ago I read a book called The 100-Year Life. And in The 100-Year Life, they speak about the fact that not only will you have multiple careers, but actually our children, all of our children, will have a 1 in 2 chance of living to be 100. That is an extraordinary thing. So not only has medicine improved and technology alongside that, but actually we should be planning for a 100-year life with the perspective that medicine is going to save us, and I would like to think that we'll have our faculties in place so that we can enjoy a 100-year life. There's no point in living a 100-year life if 30 of those aren't going to be great years. I want to live 100 positive years all the way through, and I think we would all agree on that particular point. But I hope I've kind of, in a roundabout way, answered that question from a patient perspective.
And I guess does it come back to the empowerment of individuals if they have access to said data to be, at your point, to be able to make good lifestyle decisions for the benefit of their life. So I can kind of see it from the individual patient perspective outside of the context of the clinical trial. I think the industry has to do a good job of conveying the benefits to the patient when real world data is used in the confines of a clinical trial.
I agree. And if we talk about, some of the differences between real world data and in fact, what happens in a clinical trial, there's some key points there that I think are worth stating at this point, because randomized clinical trials are highly complex, they are very costly, and they work on a very strict patient population. The whole point of real world data and real world evidence is it broadly doesn't necessarily define what that patient population is, and it doesn't necessarily require people to live or behave in a certain way. So, for example, in an early phase clinical trial unit, everything you put in your body is measured. Everything that comes out your body is measured. And on regular intervals, you'll have, blood pressure readings, ECGs, all manner of assessments taken throughout the clinical trial process, but everything is highly regulated and structured. And real world data doesn't work that way. Real world data tries to put broader opportunity of confines around that information, but really reducing the restrictions in a real life setting. That's the point. It's real life data, real life settings in real time. So the best possible outcome for that is to be watching and analyzing and seeing this data happening in real time as we're all just going about our daily normal activities that we would normally do outside of a clinical trial setting. And that's really the point, because that's where medicine and clinical trials need to get to in order to make this real world data and real world evidence work.
No, it's a fascinating topic. And I think, Adam, you've obviously worked sponsor side, you've worked CRO side, your own consultant, successful consultant, your own business there too. And regulator as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So you ticked all the boxes. I think some of us think that, I don't know, from a regulatory standpoint, a lot of the time in our industry, we defer to regulatory challenges as a reason not to do something. Can you give us any perspective from your time? And obviously you don't have to be specific, but from your time working in that kind of space as to whether that's actually a reality or not, or do we sometimes hide behind that in our industry as an excuse not to do something or not to move as quick as we perhaps could do?
It's a great question. And actually, if I'm entirely honest and open to that thought, my immediate answer is, of course, we're too strict. Of course, we're too conservative, because science is that way. And dare I say it, it's always been that way. But that will not work ourselves through this current time if we were to stick to the old rules. The rule book's gone, okay? We can rip that one up and throw it away. So the regulators and the regulations have had to adapt and will continue to do so based upon what we see today, what we're experiencing through this pandemic stage, but also coming out the other end of that, namely that medical treatments have changed. The way that we interact with our GPs, with our doctors, with our key opinion leaders is entirely different. Who's been to a conference in the last 2 years? No one. And yet, look at what we've achieved in this period of time. People are still talking. We're still talking. We're using the media that we have available to us. And actually, we are producing much better outcomes in a very much truncated time. So, in a roundabout way, regulations will inevitably change and are changing. And as I say, there is just this overarching conservatism that we find in science, in life science particularly. And there are many people now who are changing and challenging that status quo. And I'd like to think I'm one of those people, by the way.
Just on that, do you think this conservative approach is do you think it's well-founded, this conservative approach, and it's something that comes from a good place? It's just a consequence of to your point, of the actual discipline that we're working in, science, right?
Absolutely. No, I mean, ultimately, all of the regulations that we work to, the Declaration of Helsinki, ICH GCP, every regulation is there to protect the well-being of and safety of the individual that is being prescribed any clinical trial drug. And ultimately, anyone who takes a medication that has been through a clinical trial process has clear understanding that it has been highly scrutinized at every step of the way. And I can absolutely concur with that, having been involved in every step of those processes, from protocol design through to clinical study report and every nut and bolt in between. So, we are right to be conservative and absolutely pivotal around safety, but there are questions that we can ask and there are processes that we can adapt that enable us to speed these things up, certainly, to work in parallel processes where previously we'd be in series, and ultimately really just challenge what we're doing and how we're doing it, and what the impact might be faster for patients and faster for the people who need these medications in these really, really key areas as soon as they possibly can. Life-saving drugs, by very definition, are needed immediately.
Yeah.
If God forbid one of my children needed a life-saving drug, I'd travel across the globe to get it through regulatory, to get off-label use, to do whatever to get it into them as quickly as I possibly could. And so therefore we have a responsibility to adapt our processes and our regulations to really enable that to happen for individuals. Life-saving drugs should not just be available in a particular geography if that doesn't work for other people in other geographies. So technology has to adapt, process and availability of drugs, dare I say it, in that kind of best world situation. We should all have access to drugs when we need them.
Totally. No, I'm enthused by your passion to it all, Adam, as well. It's inspiring.
I live and breathe it. And breathe it, as you know, Sam. I mean, we've spoken on a number of occasions, and the one thing I will say is that the people that I work with in this industry are the most committed and passionate about what they do. We all share that common interest, and that's all that drives us. I can honestly say that.
And about the people that are working in this space, I was curious, how have you seen this real-world evidence analysis anchored in the pharmaceutical organizations? Because usually our data people are used to working in the cadence of clinical trials with database lock. There's some predictability to when the clinical data comes in. Whereas if we start monitoring data on a continuous basis and analyzing it, what does that do to how we organize ourselves around it?
It's a great question. It's a really great question that you asked there. So, of course, there is a change. There are changes around real-world data and real-world evidence. And protocols are adapted to that with regards to snapshot data, interim analyses, visuals, real-time dashboards. Those are the sorts of things that I'm seeing adapted all the time. And really the point is just to get as much early indication of the value of the data as quickly as you can. And we can do that. As I said, to my earlier point, technology now supports that. As long as we have fully integrated systems that talk to one another, where they're closed systems and there are no ambiguities around the quality of that data and the data flow, there's no reason why that can't be the case. But it means re-engineering and ensuring that there is a closed system around that data transition and the data transfer, those data views, extracts through APIs into dashboards, and however that translates itself. But that's absolutely key to making sure that continuous monitoring happens. Coming back to the earlier point around patient safety, pivotal, seeing it all the time. And really what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing is there's kind of I would say a light touch real world evidence piece coming alongside, following clinical trial methodologies. And then there are others who are doing much bigger things with wearables and, in a more decentralized fashion. dare I say it. So, you have a number of different parallel streams taking place at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's a broad topic, and it's one that I think a lot gets lumped into. I hear people talking about the use of EHR data and simple technology, well, not simple technologies, but technologies to I don't know, solve the problem of transcription errors between EHR and EDC. Is that real world data, or is it not?
Dare I say it? Electronic health records, medical records in the UK alone. Let's talk about EHR records in the UK. Okay, so pretty much every primary care trust has a different system in the UK. So I don't know specifically. Let's say maybe talking 10, 15 different systems in the UK. So that data is not standardized. The one thing I can tell you about clinical trial methodologies these days is we use controlled terminologies that do fix particular field names, particular field lengths. And that means that whenever a publication or a final report is uploaded to FDA, MHRA, EMA, it is consistent. And there is full visibility and consistency across that. We can't even standardize one system in the UK for our medical records. And the UK is quite small relative to the US, Europe, Asia Pacific, dare I say. There is no one size fits all with EHRs. So effectively what you're trying to do is funnel that information into standard categories and standard analysis sets. That's a huge job. And we talk about the implementation of artificial intelligence and machine learning, but actually you just need a human being to figure out what goes where before you've even got anywhere near machine learning around that particular point. And that's if you can get hold of that data, because CPRD, who come under the auspices of the MHRA in the UK, are that central data repository. And then there's clinicaltrials.gov and various other websites, and you can get this information, but you've got to make some sense of it, and you've got to make it talk to one another and compare apples and apples. That's the biggest challenge with all of this data in electronic health records, is really the categorization, the simplification, and just making sense of the complex. I hope I've tried to simplify that as best I can for you, Sam, because having been under the bonnet of these data sets, they're highly complex.
Yeah, no, you have actually, and I think you touched upon AI ML as well, another buzzword, and somebody told me quite a nice expression around AI ML recently. It was, don't put the AI ML cart before the data horse, basically.
And that's exactly the point I'm making to you. You've got to understand your data, the format of it, and the overarching plan, the data plan, the data categorization, and dare I say it, the nomenclature and the categorization of that before you can ever go anywhere near applying anything overlaying that. You need to really simply understand your data. And it's not easy. There are many companies out there at the moment who are trying to run long-term safety studies using widely available data sets from CPRD and from clinicaltrials.gov, and they're struggling, to be honest. It's difficult. It's really complex. And the kind of individuals and skill sets that are doing this work, have got years and years of experience. Statistical programmers, statisticians, epidemiologists, they're all trying to do it, and they're all trying to break the code, and no one's done it yet.
Well, it's going to keep us all in a job for a long time to come, by the sounds of it, in this complex space that we're in.
It certainly will. It certainly will. And I hope I've explained why that is the case as well. It's not that it can't be done, and it will happen. Over the next 2 or 3 years, we will see fundamental change because people are asking the questions now. We now understand what the questions are that we're trying to get to the bottom of. There is a hypothesis, and we want to just figure it out. But, that involves getting great minds together, crunching thought and process together, and coming out with the best outcome. And we will get there. We absolutely will get there. But right now, there's a number of challenges around that. And I hope I've spoken to those points as well.
No, you made it really clear to me. And I'm a bit of a technology geek, so I always bias towards technology type questions. But I'm curious to hear what are you really excited about when it comes to tech in this space? Anything that's getting you really kind of up for it, or are you a bit fatigued with the tech hyperbole that exists in our space as well?
I think tech is an enabler. I don't think it is the answer. But to my earlier point, you've got to understand what you've got before you can overlay any technology with that. So we would be best served in understanding what it is we want to achieve and then working back from that. That's generally the way I work as a consultant. What is it you want to achieve? What's the solution? And what are the steps that you really need to use to get to that place? Who are the people? What are the skill sets? And what are the organizations that can best provide you with that expertise? And, pooling together those skills to drive the answer. That's really what I see as being the future, is smart companies working in a very smart manner together to get the best possible outcomes. And those companies are already there. They are happening. There are so many startups at the moment. We talked about the podcast that I'm involved with. We interview some extraordinary people on the Huxley Morton podcast, and these people are asking those questions. I have spoken to so many people in the last year who I would never have come into contact with without having had that medium and that opportunity. And all of them are asking different questions. None of them are doing the same thing.
Yeah. There are just so many problems to tackle, I think. But I think you hit the nail on the head. You can't just chuck the shiniest technology into a problem and expect it to solve the problem itself. Despite of AI machine learning, you still need all of the other components there, and you need to start with the end in mind and work backwards. I think that's a good summary.
It's the only way that works for me, to be honest. If a client comes to me and asks me for a solution, I need to know what the issues are long before I can come up with a solution. I need to do that analysis of the requirements and really understand what it is they're trying to achieve from whatever their question or problem might be. It's the only way that I know how to do it. And that might be my scientific background, but also I think you just got to deal in facts. Take the emotion out of it, take timelines out of it even, and take cost out of it. And then you'll get back to the real nitty gritty. What is it you really need to achieve here? And is it feasible? Is it possible? Is it achievable?
Amen. So Adam, you're a pretty positive guy, but there must be something in the industry that really gets under your skin, that really makes you want to change something. If I was to press you on that, what do you think that might be?
It's the old way. It's definitely the old way. It's definitely we've always done it that way. It's the comfy chair that I'm pointing to in the corner.
Yeah.
Don't take the comfy chair. That's not where change happens. That's not where growth happens. You got to push yourself. You got to get out your comfort zone, and you've really, really got to challenge everything that we take as being okay based upon 15, 20, 25 years worth of experience. And if I'm saying that as someone with that exposure to this industry for this period of time, I'm really enthused by the youngsters coming into this industry. I work with a lot of people from my alumni at the University of Greenwich, and the enthusiasm with which students are coming into this industry is quite extraordinary. They are so informed and so well versed in some of the challenges that we're experiencing. And I think we're in good hands. I genuinely do. I am seeing some incredibly talented young people leaving university these days with very clear intentions and great skills and every intent to do the best they can do. Now, if we can pass on the baton to this next generation of scientists and graduates that are coming out of university, I think we're in really, really a good place.
I think that's a great note to end on. The future is bright.
Thanks very much indeed, Adam. I'm certainly enthused. I'm going to go and find my Fitbit, charge it up, start to get some insights in terms of my real world data and see if it impacts positively on my life. Thanks so much, Adam. And where can our listeners find you if they want to get in touch or indeed come on your podcast?
Well, I'm a co-host on the Huxley Morton podcast with my co-host James Fowle. I can't take the credit for that. He initiated it, and I was one of his first interviewees, and have thoroughly enjoyed being a co-host with him over the last year, 18 months. If any of your listeners want to get hold of me, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to get hold of me, and is really my shop front. And I've said on a number of occasions, I'd pay a lot of money to keep that shop front open, because I seem to get an awful lot of referrals and professional contacts through it. It's a great platform, and I'd recommend it to any of our listeners that are perhaps not using it. It's been game changing for me for the last couple of years. So I'd be more than happy to have conversations with people in and around this, or indeed anything else. And I just want to restate my thanks to both yourself, Sam, and Ivana, for the opportunity to speak to you about real world evidence today, some of the challenges in and around clinical trials. And indeed, as you say, Ivana, the future is really, really bright for this industry. It's never shone so bright, if I'm entirely frank. And I'm so proud to be involved in this industry, more than I've ever been, actually. And it's a great place to be. I can't sell it any more than that.
On that note, you said it all. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to Transformation in Trials. If you have suggestions for a guest for our show, write to hosts@transformationintrials.com. You can find more episodes in Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and the show notes are available at transformationintrials.buzzsprout.com. Thank you for listening.